Chapter 45. The Garden of All Beginnings. Outside the laboratory window, the garden of St. Vincent's began to change. The lavender and lilies were joined by flora that had no name in English, but whose colors were the very frequencies of joy. This was the Garden of All Beginnings, a place where every act of kindness in the history of the universe grew as a flower. Sam and Ruth walked through the garden, their steps light, their hands never letting go. They weren't old, and they weren't young. They were simply eternal. "Every headline I wrote," Ruth said, looking at a vibrant indigo bloom that smelled of old ink and fresh rain, "every story of justice, it grew here. And every case we solved," Sam added, touching a silver leaf that pulsed with the steady rhythm of a guardian's heart. "Every person we protected, they are part of this peace." They found themselves at the old well, the one where the silence had been hidden. Looking down into the water, they didn't see their reflections. They saw the billion souls they had helped inspire. They saw a great tapestry being woven, where the thread of a small English village was inextricably linked to the farthest star. The stone heart didn't just turn to gold, Sam noted. It turned into everything. Chapter 46. The Singularity of Mercy. As the eons condensed into a single point of infinite density, the guardians of St. Vincent's prepared for the Great Reset. The universe was old, its stars fading into the cosmic dusk, but the resonance of the Cotswolds remained as bright as a summer noon. "Is it time, Boniface?" Sam asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his badge, which now pulsed with the light of every soul that had ever sought justice. "It is, Inspector," Boniface replied. She was holding a test tube that contained a single drop of clear liquid, the absolute synthesis of the apostle flowers, the pure intent, and the tears of 1,000 reconciled families. "We are no longer observers. We are the inception." They stood at the center of the sanctuary, where the anchor stone had dissolved into a swirling nebula of indigo and gold. This was the singularity of mercy. Boniface stepped forward and poured the liquid into the heart of the nebula. The reaction was not an explosion, but an expansion of absolute, unadulterated love. "Write the lead, Ruth," Sam whispered. "I already have," Ruth said, her pen carving letters into the very fabric of the new reality. "In the beginning, there was kindness, and the kindness became the light." As the old universe collapsed, the guardians didn't vanish. They became the laws of the next one. Boniface became the law of curiosity. Sam became the law of protection. Ruth became the law of truth. Chapter 47. The New Genesis. A new Big Bang erupted across the void. But this time, the matter was infused with the resonance of great slaughter. The new stars didn't just burn, they hummed. The new planets didn't just orbit, they danced. On one particular planet, orbiting a young, golden sun, a valley began to form. Limestone cliffs rose from the earth, and a mist, warm, protective, and smelling of lavender, began to cling to the rolling hills. In the center of the valley, a structure began to grow. It wasn't built by hands. It was called into being by the memory of 500 years. It had arched windows, stone cloisters, and a room that smelled of ozone and ancient glass. A young woman stood at the arched window, looking out at the dawn. She wore a simple robe, and around her neck was a small, bronze magnifying glass. She didn't know why, but she felt as though she had been standing here for an eternity. 500 years, she whispered, her voice a perfect echo of 1,000 lives. And the story is just beginning. Chapter 48. The Eternal Perennial. Back in the realm of pure resonance, the original Boniface, Sam, and Ruth watched the new world unfold. They saw the young woman in the lab. They saw a young man in a tweed jacket walking toward her with a question about a stolen heirloom. They saw a young writer sitting by the river, ready to record the mystery. The Stoneheart was now the beating pulse of all that is, and all that ever shall be. "We did it," Sam said, pulling Ruth close. "No, Sam," Boniface corrected gently, adjusting the celestial goggles on her brow. "Love did it. We just held the test tube." The bells of the new St. Vincent's began to toll a sound that echoed not just through the valley, but through the DNA of every living thing in the new universe. It was a reminder that, no matter how deep the shadow, The truth is always hiding in plain sight, and that mercy is the only thing that truly endures. Epilogue. The final frequency. Centuries, then millennia, then eons passed. The universe itself eventually grew old, but the resonance of St. Vincent's never faded. It had become the fundamental frequency of existence, the quiet song of mercy. The legend of the Stoneheart became the creation story of a new universe, one built not on the cold collision of particles. And in the center of that new universe, there remains a small, bronze-like energy field that pulses like a sun. It bears no name, but those who listen closely can hear the bells of a small chapel, tolling for a past that will always be the future. The story of great slaughter never ends. It is the story of us all, the heart that was stone, the light that was seed, and the love that was, and is, and ever shall be, the home of every soul. The final frequency was not a sound, but a feeling. It was the feeling of a heavy mist lifting to reveal a sunlit valley, and the knowledge that, in the end, everything, absolutely everything, is precisely as it was meant to be. For within the stone heart of the world, love is the only perennial. The Stone Heart of St. Vincent's, a novel of mystery, romance, and redemption in great slaughter. Chapter 1. The Echo of 500 Years. The mist clung to the rolling hills of great slaughter like a shroud of grey silk, damp and unyielding. It was a morning that felt heavy with the weight of centuries, the kind of Cotswold dawn where the line between the earth and the sky blurred into a singular, melancholic silver. For Sister Boniface, standing at the arched window of her laboratory at St. Vincent's Convent, the view was bittersweet. For 500 years, this stone edifice had stood as a bastion of peace, a sanctuary for the broken, a fortress for the devoted, and, more recently, a world-class hub for forensic chemistry. Now, the air smelled of change, and to Boniface's sensitive nose, it was a foul vintage. It smelled of the cold, metallic ink on legal contracts, and the acrid diesel fumes of a progress that didn't care for prayer. 500 years, she whispered, her breath fogging the ancient glass, enduring perennial. This be the time of our quincentennial, and yet it feels like an ending. She wasn't just reciting history, she was reciting a eulogy. The convent, the only home she had known for decades, was being sold. The land, which had witnessed the rise and fall of Tudor kings and the quiet endurance of local farmers, was destined to become Lord Adam Sedgwick Towers. It was a modern luxury living solution. To Boniface, looking at the blueprints, it looked like a skeletal cage of glass and steel designed to imprison the soul of the village. In the courtyard below, the rehearsals for the pageant were underway, providing a chaotic soundtrack to her mourning. Miss Thimble, the town's most anxious music teacher, was waving her baton with a frantic energy that suggested she was trying to ward off evil spirits rather than conduct a choir. "No, no, no, Dottie!" The voice of Sister Peter boomed from the makeshift stage, echoing off the limestone walls. "Music needs to flow around my words like a river, not a flood. Dottie, do remember, your cue is the Reverend Mother, symbolically handing over the key. It's a moment of dignity, not a race to the finish line." "So sorry," Dottie squeaked from behind the piano, clutching her sheet music as if it were a life raft. "I was worried I'd miss the dramatic pause." Sister Boniface smiled, despite the ache in her chest. The pageant was Reverend Mother Adrian's idea, a way for the sisters to go out with their heads held high. It was an odd time to celebrate, but as the Reverend Mother often said, the Lord loves a joyful noise, even in the midst of a storm, especially when the storm is wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. A sharp knock at the lab door broke her reverie. Beside him was Felix Livingstone, the young, earnest sergeant who had become like a son to the sisters. "Inspector." Boniface greeted them, turning from the window with a practiced mask of cheer. "I assume you aren't here for a chemical analysis of the sacramental wine, though I must say, the 1962 vintage is surprisingly robust." Sam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked tired, the kind of tiredness that comes from seeing a world you love slowly being dismantled. "Lord Sedgwick is here," sister. And that fellow Palliser, they've brought a model of the proposed development. They want it on stage for the speeches tomorrow. A vision of the future, they call it. A model of our demise, Boniface noted dryly. It's progress, they say, Felix added, though his tone suggested he was quoting a textbook he found particularly distasteful. They descended to the main hall, where the air was thick with the tension of a funeral. Lord Matthew Sedgwick, the current Earl, stood by a draped object. He looked older than his years, his face a map of hidden debts and inherited burdens. Beside him stood Ronnie Palliser, a developer with a shark-like grin and eyes that seemed to be calculating the square footage of the chapel's altar. "Ah, Sister Boniface," Lord Matthew said, his voice strained. "I know this is difficult. My father loved St. Vincent's dearly. I just wish, well, circumstances being what they are. Circumstances usually involve a lack of imagination." "My lord," Boniface replied gently, her eyes meeting his. Matthew looked away first. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open. A woman entered with the stride of someone who owned the world, or at least intended to edit it. She was dressed in sharp London fashion, a camera slung over her shoulder and a notebook tucked under her arm.